Welcome to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gil Roth, and we're here to preserve and promote culture, one weekly conversation at a time. You can subscribe to the Virtual Memories Show through iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, Google Play, and a whole bunch of other venues. Just visit our sites, chimeraobscura.com/VM or vmspod.com to find more information, along with our RSS feed. And follow the show on Twitter and Instagram at VMSPod. Oh man, I'm posting this one a little late, but with an excuse, or a whole bunch of excuses. I'm recording this in my hotel room in Frankfurt, where I'm attending a big pharma conference for a few days. Since it was my first international travel since the pandemic began, I figured I'd also go somewhere more interesting than Frankfurt, frankly. So I spent Saturday through Tuesday morning in London. Tuesday morning means I got up at 3:30 in the morning and got a taxi at 4 a.m. to Heathrow. So I was in the UK for 70 hours. Barely gave myself any time to slow down, but you guys know that if I relax, I may never get back up. So it's for the best. But as far as a travelogue goes, I got in, I visited Hatchard's bookstore in Piccadilly, which is one of the best bookstores in the world. Went over to the National Gallery, saw the Winslow Homer and Lucian Freud exhibitions, and then checked out some of the permanent collection at the gallery. Never been before, and they had Belshazzar's Feast by Rembrandt, which is just mind-blowing, and a lot of other really good stuff. But so did all that, then got back to the hotel, then rested a few minutes, then visited my past pod guest, John Clute, and his wife, Judith, for dinner and lots of conversation. Got home, day 2, spent the morning reading, took a little walk, took the train out to Reading so I could record a podcast with Peter Schjeldahl. He is the husband of recent guest Ruth Skur, and he's the past editor of the London Times and the Times Literary Supplement. And we had this great conversation, which you'll get to hear in a few weeks. But after we finished, Peter took me on a little boat ride up the Thames, and it was really lovely. We talked literature, talked politics. The light was just lovely and near golden, and it was just one of this sort of singular and wonderful experiences that the podcast opens me up to. And then it was back to London, and that's where I met up with past guest Woody Phoenix. We'd never gotten to meet in person, so he came to my hotel. We hung out, went over to the ICA Cafe. I gabbed his ear off. I don't know. I got a lot going on. I can't write about it, and I can't talk about it here, but talking about it one-on-one with people seems to help. Anyway, I'd blame all the gabbing on jet lag and personal exhaustion and all that, but I really think it's just me. Anyway, Woody didn't seem irate or anything, so, we'll see. On Monday, I visited another pal and past guest, Celia Paul, the artist at her home and studio, and we also gabbed for hours, and we tried to sketch each other and agreed never to show each other or the public what we drew, which is for the best, trust me, at least from my side. But that was a really neat experience because, well, I'll tell you. First, we took a walk through Russell Square after that, grabbed some lunch, and we talked a bit about the Lucian Freud exhibition. He is the father of her son, and she's the subject of one of the paintings in the exhibition. He painted her numerous times, but there's only one of her there. And we got to talking about him, about art, about her lifelong sort of response to their relationship. And it really got me thinking about what an artist, especially an artist like Freud or an artist like Celia, sees when they're looking at a subject. And so for me, being drawn by her while we were simultaneously sketching each other, for me, it was more about just seeing what her face did while she was looking at me trying to draw, which is very different, more animated than her conversational face, I guess. But anyway, it was a really neat experience. After that, I got back to my hotel. Well, actually, no, after Celia, I headed up to the home of writer and Professor Marina Warner so I could record another podcast, and that one was a delight. That said, it came at the end of all of this activity, so I was veering all over the goddamn place. That's an episode that I'm going to have to do a lot of editing, and it's not because of the guest. It's because I just went off on these flights, and she just hung along to watch. But it was really good. But what we're getting at here is I did art exhibition, visited 3 past guests, did 2 podcasts, had a trip up the Thames, and then I had to come here to Frankfurt. So one of the big problems was almost everybody I visited gave me books, and I really hadn't accounted for that happening with my incredibly concise carry-on packing for this week-long trip. Left Friday night, coming back Thursday night. And I had some anxiety that they were going to have a problem with my suitcase, my carry-on when I got to the Lufthansa flight this morning, but worked out fine. Got here, did day 1 of the conference, had a great time. I am a burned-out wreck now, as you can tell, but anyway, what I'm saying is I've been a little busy, so the show is a little late. Sue me. But you're going to enjoy this one, I promise. My guest this time around is the art critic Jerry Saltz, and he has this brand new collection out called Art is Life. Icons and iconoclasts, visionaries and vigilantes, and flashes of hope in the night. It's from Riverhead Books. It contains about a little more than 20 years of Jerry's art reviews and essays from New York Magazine and their website, Vulture. And the book is a real delight. And it's not just because of the artists and shows that Jerry highlights over the years, and the enthusiasm and the insight that he brings to them, but also the bigger arcs of the art world as it transformed over the course of this century, really from the 90s onwards, I think. And he'll talk about it in the beginning of our conversation, but he's really conscious of the ecosystem in which art gets made and gets shown and gets sold, and how that's all changed in recent decades, and what that means for artists and the people who just love to appreciate art, maybe not the collectors. The book's got, it's a well-deserved sense of revulsion about the over-the-top influx of money into this art world, but there's still a lot of love for the art that comes out over the length and breadth of Jerry's pieces. The book's hopeful, ultimately, I think, as befits, a book with the title Art is Life. And it's especially when Jerry shows how collector mania can warp an artist's career. It's a really fascinating book, seeing the progression of his work and how it tracks with how art and the art world, and the art world changed over the years. And it closes with some longer pandemic era pieces that are more personal and they're really something. I'll just put it that way. They're very good pieces of writing, very revealing, and very much about what art can mean and what it can do for us, and what we can do when we experience art with open eyes and all sorts of cliches, open heart, blah, blah, blah. But I've enjoyed Jerry's writing for years and years. And I actually cite a couple of pieces during our talk that have stuck with me for a long time, like his analysis of the sculpture Boxer at Rest, which led to me making a piece of art that is one of my faves. But he's a very different art critic in tone and in sentence, I would say, than 2 of my previous guests who were in his field, Sebastian Smee and the late, great Peter Schjeldahl. It was a blast to get him on the show because he brings a different voice and a different perspective on this stuff. And he also promised to connect me with Roberta Smith, his wife, and a superior art critic, as he says. So I'm hoping we get to sit down sometime. I should also note that Peter Schjeldahl, the New Yorker art critic, died a few days before we recorded. And, my afternoon with Peter was an unforgettable experience. And I knew he and Jerry were in near daily contact. So it was just lovely to talk with him and sort of get a feel for what their friendship was like. and what that relationship meant to Jerry, and maybe a little bit of what it meant to Peter. Anyway, go get Art is Life, as well as Jerry's first book, How to Be an Artist. That's also from Riverhead Books. That's adapted from a New York Magazine piece that he did, How to Be an Artist, that sort of grew in scope as he began, putting it together for a book. But I think Art is Life will really give you an idea of the story, or stories really, of art in the 21st century, as well as how older pieces and older artists resonate with us over the course of our lives. Now, as caveats go, we did this one in person. When we got started, Jerry was in the process of figuring out how to confirm a collaboration Instagram post between his account and New York Magazine's. He is an amazing user of Instagram, posts these videos from art galleries and other places that really serve as a new form of art criticism, which we'll talk about in the show. But the thing was, New York Magazine was going to use one of his video posts from a gallery for a story, and we were trying to figure out how that worked. Somehow it came together while my recorder was rolling. I decided to keep it. Here's Jerry's bio from the book. Jerry Saltz is a senior art critic at New York Magazine and its entertainment site Vulture, and the author of the New York Times bestseller, How to Be an Artist. In 2018, he was awarded the Pulitzer Prize for Criticism. A frequent guest lecturer at major universities and museums, he has spoken at Harvard University, the Museum of Modern Art, the Guggenheim Museum, the Whitney Museum of American Art, and many other venues, and has taught at Columbia University, Yale University, the Rhode Island School of Design, the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, and elsewhere. And now, the Virtual Memories conversation with Jerry Saltz.
Well, the truth for me is, Gil, I get hundreds of thousands of hits a week.
Which is bizarre.
And it's bizarre.
Yeah.
It's as
No
bizarre
offense.
to me
But, yeah.
and thrilling and material to work with. And I've begged New York Magazine. I've said, I don't want any more money at all because I'm already doing this. I'm already what I think of as self-publishing an art magazine once or twice a day. On unplanned stories every day. I never know what I'm going to post, but about this new kind of post you just saw them make for me at New York Magazine, I've been begging them somehow to say, I don't want any more money, but you guys should benefit from these hundreds upon hundreds of thousands of clicks and interactions and website taps. I don't even know what they are.
Yeah.
Because I know nothing about tech. I don't know how to upload, download, nothing.
You just hold the
And today,
the camera
right
up
in front of you, in theory,
we have monetized you, Saltz.
well, I don't get the money up, but it says error. So there you,
have
go.
been
Old
monetized.
people.
I think that's what it is.
But I hope they are, because
Yes.
I don't want it. I'm already paid. So that's what you just saw me do.
Congratulations. And I'll ask about your social, and we're going to keep this whole thing anyway because it's a nice intro. I'll ask about your social media self-discovery and performance later on. But tell me about the selection process of Art is Life. Like what went into this should stay, this doesn't need to stay, this I'm on the fence about?
The book, Art is Life, is really the story of art in the 21st century. This extraordinary changes, massive changes that have taken place where more people have taken more stages in more different ways than at any time in art history. And as a result, art history is being rewritten. And I realized that I had strapped myself to the mast, many years ago as a weekly and a daily critic, that I was reporting from the front lines, or as close as I could get to them, or behind the lines even. And that at the same time, the title Art is Life, meaning, well, none of the art made in this century, from the contested election of 2000 to the contested election of 2020 to the day before 1 hour ago, has been made under remotely normal circumstances, that everyone listening to this from whatever side of the fence, and since you are a cultural podcast, we're all more or less on the same side, but in any way, we're all living with PTSD. And that even if you make stripes or triangles or still lifes or only write love poetry or songs about railroads, the content of now, the content of this life right here is in all of the work I was writing about. And at the same time, I was trying to cover the great context that we were seeing, the contexts that we were seeing slam into, shatter, take over, eclipse, merge with, destroy, etc., each other. And that's the story of this book. And the selections of these pieces really wanted to tell that story, make an arc through that time, which we can talk about, the incredible changes.
How much were you cognizant of that as the time was going by? How much did you need this moment of stepping back, especially what the last 2 years have forced upon us, to actually step back and really start to assess not just the changes, but your work and how it chronicles?
I never stepped back. Yeah. I always felt absolutely right, sort of caught in the hurricane of it, in the best sense of the word and the most terrifying, from 2001, when everybody said everything changed on 9/11. And I wrote that next morning, everything has changed, we don't know how, but I speculated, which I think I accidentally turned out to be right. Everybody said everything is changing, but what I think is what's going to happen now is America is about to become much more of what it already was. Mm-hmm. And oddly enough, that is what happened. We saw the Bush-Cheney war machine go into effect almost immediately. In the art world, on the other hand, in the middle of this war, more money from more places rushed into our art world than had ever been here in the history of the world. So suddenly there was all this growth, expansion, and as I've written, and Peter wrote, art and money having sex in public, but more so than they'd ever done before. Peter Schjeldahl, than they'd ever done before, more prolifically, more wantonly. And I'm not sure what else you asked me right there.
More just how cognizant were you of those changes as they were taking place?
I was absolutely like, this is happening, everybody listen. And yet the big picture, which I kept trying to write about, the context of now, was in my work. I just had no idea where anything was ever going, but I wasn't that interested in trying to make predictions, certainly. Yeah.
Not predictions so much as a retrospect, an ability to say, oh, this was the arc we were on. Okay, yes. I start to get it now.
Yeah.
Even though, again, one of your key arguments is against teleology within art. In fact, talk about modernism and your your detestation of that whole notion of...
I look... We also lived in this period during it was a collapse of the longest running movement in the history of art history, of modernism, that lasted roughly, if you want to say, from Cézanne. You could put a little earlier, a little later, but let's just say the entire damn 20th century. Then there was this wild Oedipal daddy complex movement that thought it was ending modernism, but never noticed it named itself after the movement, a little thing called postmodernism, where art started becoming about art. And by the time I started writing, at that point, it seemed like to have run its course, but it kept going, and to the point where I think only people in the art world could even understand what the art was about, let alone my being unable to understand what was being written about it. Now, you have to understand, I did not start writing criticism, which you may or may not know, until I was about 40 years old.
Yeah.
And I was a long-distance truck driver at the time. Most people are familiar with this story. But when I first started writing in the late 80s, people were still writing the late commodified object of post-Baudrillardian, Deleuzian simulacra.
Yeah.
I didn't know what the hell it was about because I have no degrees. I could never understand it. I'm not against it. But I just didn't know what it was. Mm-hmm. And art seemed to me to be getting pretty high on its own fumes at that point.
Mm-hmm. How much do you think your writing benefited from not having a background in art history? And the art theory, which is a separate thing that, right. I think would have submarined anything you tried to write. But
I think it cost me a lot of emotional pain, Gil. There is always the demons in one's mind, like, well, I don't really know my art history. Wait, what was the Barbizon? What are the Nabi? Wait, Byzantium is exactly what dates? Which one was the Holy Roman Emperor? Is it Charles V? I mean, what's going on? And when you're a weekly critic and you have to write on a show called Byzantium, you only have about a day to read a catalog that's 600 pages long, so it's hopeless. So you're always learning on the job, always. And so I've always felt at a disadvantage about it, but I think that it allowed, just the way all artists listening to this podcast right now, and I try to make this point over and over in the book, that you are in a way taking your disadvantages, your ineptitude, your mistakes, what you can't do, and learning how to make it work for you. Some people like Giacometti had to make 5 billion little marks just to make a head, where Matisse made one of the longest marks in art history, and that's only about 8 inches long, before he even had a nervous breakdown and had to take his brush off the painting. So making it up as I went along, week by week, kept me sort of writing as hard as I could, flying by the seat of my pants, but it did something even better. It meant I couldn't really lie. I couldn't cover up with that old language of the post-Baudrillardian simulacra, Marxist capitalist, blah, blah. I didn't have time for that. The piece was due, and I'm proud to say I never missed a deadline. So I told myself I want to write in my own voice. I want to write about what I do think works and what I don't, and why. And I have to put that in the vernacular, as it were. And not write down to anybody, and try to have us all get on the same page together. So if you don't agree with me, and that's what I want people to understand in the book, if you don't agree with me, I'm way open to an argument. Look at my Facebook, the Instagram every day. Yeah. I have 825 new ones torn from me every morning in my comments. And it hurts, to be that
attention,
wrong.
So,
yeah. Well, it isn't the attention thing, but that's always good. Yeah. We're all wanting to dance naked in public, okay? If we were remotely normal human beings, we wouldn't be performing in our work, doing our work, whatever it is we make, and needing it to be in public. Yeah. You'd be like a normal person at home, kissing your dog, your mate, but we're living out loud. And so I think my disadvantages put me at a great advantage to finding a different voice. Maybe I'm the glockenspiel in the art orchestra. I don't know what I am, but I know that there's a lot of sincerity in my work. And maybe that's not cool, but that's what it is. I'm trying to share every single aspect of the context of the work, what came before it, why this one might be better than that one, how the artist's career is going, what makes it new, what doesn't, etc. And write about the system constantly at the same time. Yeah. Never see the show without seeing also, well, it's in this white room, but the white room is a thing we call a mega gallery. And most people, when they go into, like, may I go on for a minute?
Yeah, please.
When they go into a mega gallery, an almost tragic thing has happened to a younger generation. I'm 71, but almost everybody younger than me, anytime they go into most galleries these days, and they're all kind of big, many of them are rather, they see only the context. They can't see the art for the context, and that is money. And money makes us cynical. And cynical, I think, eats us alive on the inside and makes us suspicious of the context first, most easily. Oh, look at them. They have all the money. Look how these people are dressed. Where the people that work in those galleries are just as poor as you are. And I write about that in this book. They are people like me and you. Their laundry's on the floor at home. They have roommates. They woke up at 3 a.m. worrying about their job. They work under every gallerist is missing the same chromosome, and they're all control freaks. I want you to be able to see that, yes, this is David's Werner or Hauser and Wirth Empire or the Pace Gallery, which I think of as the sort of fire festival of art galleries, because it's wild. I go in there and I don't quite know where I am, and I feel lost because of the space and all the kind of multi-purpose walk-in environmental things they do, but I would never miss a show there. Ever. And I don't think that makes them a better gallery or a worse one, just a descriptive. I want you to be able to see through that context and get to the work and understand that somebody behind this is just like you too, that they really meant to make this thing, that every work of art that you're seeing took a certain amount of courage, and that it is very new to you in the first seconds, at least, that you see it. So I'm trying to keep all that in play.
Did you have, we'll say, influences or precursors? Were there people you looked at and, is this someone I'd like to write at, or this is someone I could never possibly hope to write like?
Well, as a idiot that graduated almost at the bottom of his high school class, left his parents' home. I left my parents' home the night I graduated high school, handed my parents my diploma, and moved into a secret apartment that my friends and I had taken in Chicago. And I really never went home again. Mm-hmm. But then I was a wise guy. I became an artist and was an artist for, I guess, about 10 years or so in my 20s. I made work. I sold my work. I was written about in Art Forum. I got the enormous National Endowment for the Arts grant, which was $1,500 in like 1978 or 79, before most of you are born. But I took that money and I moved to New York. I loved being an artist. I was in ecstasy. I lived in a 4,000 square foot, 5th floor walk-up loft in downtown Chicago on Hubbard Street. It had no heat, no running water, and I was in ecstasy. Mm-hmm. I would fill up buckets of water and use them in the toilet to make it flush. I cooked on a hot plate. The only furniture I owned was, I think, a wooden couch, a mattress, and a gigantic drafting table. And every day I would stand at that drafting table and make my art. And every night I stayed up late with my friends. We touched antenna, slept together, argued together, fought together, loved together, and wanted to take over the world because we thought we were the shit. And I loved that life. And then I moved to New York. And within about 12 months, I wasn't making art. The demons that speak to everybody started speaking to me. You're too dumb. You don't know what you're doing. To answer your question, you don't know your art history. You don't know how to paint. What's figuration? You're short. You're fat. You're balding. Women don't like you. It's just constant. The same voices everybody has, except I listened to those demons. And slowly I stopped making art, and that was very painful. It's still painful to talk about because it just felt so good to make art. Yeah. And I self-exiled and became a long-distance truck driver. And so, to get back to you asking me what my influences were, after about 10 years or something of doing this, of driving back and forth across America more than anybody that's ever listened to this has, I saw nothing. I've seen 100 100 yards to the left, 100 yards to the right of every interstate in this country, and I've seen nothing. I learned nothing. I was in a tunnel. I had my CB handle was the Jewish cowboy, but no one would talk to me. They must have sniffed me out immediately as a wise guy. I thought, I've got to get out of here. And I decided to become an art critic, and I learned from reading art form. And none of that is my influence. Really, what my influences were the kind of the art I loved. Yeah. I liked like Beethoven. And I liked how he would begin a symphony like da-da-da-da. And I thought, yes, I want to have strong beginnings. I want to have a strong declarative opening to give the reader a sense of the structure I'm going to use, and also what I'm whiffing, as it were, a scent of where I'm going and what I'm going to say. I believe you should say the artist's name in the first few sentences, or get off the boat. I can't stand all the throat clearing that so many critics do. And you read down to the 7th or 8th paragraph, you think you're reading about, like, you know, the World Trade Organization and different treaties, and suddenly you're dealing with a small sculpture of like a shoebox, and it's supposed to represent all this, and you feel lost. So my influences are deeper structures, frankly, not art critics and writers, I'm afraid to say.
Well, it put me in mind, very recently I was reading the intro to Nothing If Not Critical, the Robert Hughes collection, and he mentions reading similar magazines in the 50s, I think, in Australia, when there was no art. There was nothing to go see.
There was criticism, but no art.
He's looking at little reproductions in the magazines and trying to, I guess this is what it's going to look like if I ever get to a museum or a gallery and get to see these things. But similarly, building an understanding, I guess, or trying to get some grasp of what the art is in terms of, how people are talking about it, and realizing it's not what he wanted to write about. No, very different art critic, I know, and a very bombastic voice in a different way.
Hell of a writer, and I've read his book on Goya, which is very good, and Rome, which is really good. But the truth is, the kind of criticism that he probably started reading would be Clement Greenberg. And I knew by the time I came along that he seemed like a bully to me. And that if I wanted to be a Clement Greenberg, I knew I didn't believe in that because I didn't have a sense of power. I came as what I felt as an outsider.
Or a sense of authority.
It meant nothing to me, and which is how my work changed with social media.
I want to ask how the work changed overall. Like, what did you see in the course of 20 years of your pieces in here? What did you really see yourself changing in terms of the writing?
I saw myself with skin in the game. Yeah. So much seemed to be at stake with all this social change and so many different contestations on so many levels of both art, who was making it, where it was being shown, who was buying it, and the politics that were going on at all times around it. And I wanted to somehow tie all this together instead of just looking at the object or just looking at the commodified late post this or that, of try to make it one whole ball of wax. So in the beginning, I saw in the year 2000, Jeff Koons showed one of the most glorious public sculptures I'd ever seen, which was the 43-foot tall topiary puppy in front of the Rockefeller Center that emitted this kind of Jeffersonian or equanimity or this equalizing joy to anybody who saw it, and that seemed to sum up that period where we actually had the deluded, absurd fantasy of the end of history, that the arc of history had come to democracy, freedom, social justice. We actually believed this. We had the death of the author. As soon as women and artists of color showed up, we pronounced the author dead. So like, God
forbid they get a say in this.
It's done now. Sorry, that shop is closed. The novel was dead, then painting was pronounced dead a few times. Art world loves to be like a mortician, right? Koons shows up. And I always thought that if Osama bin Laden had stood in front of that puppy, and I say this only metaphorically, that there's so much joy coming from it. Its deep content was both joy on the one hand of just looking at this piece of art that was also like a movie. You didn't need an explanation to understand a big movie. You didn't need a big explanation to understand this big sculpture made out of a dead art, topiary, horticulture art, which was once an art, once one of the 7 arts. He returned to this dead form and he made it live again. The other deep content of it, if you were in the art world, you would also know that Jeff Koons was a control freak of the nth degree. And I walked up one night when he was building the thing, and if you've ever heard him, he sounds like he looks like a Teletubby and sounds a little like, say, Ronald Reagan. And I walked past late one night when you would still see famous artists like doing their own work without big crews and stuff. And he was planting all the little flowers on the paw and all that. And he said, Jerry, would you like to plant this petunia? And I went, gee, I'd love to. And I put it in, and he looked at it for a while, and he said, that's perfect, Jerry. And then he looked at it again and moved it about 1,000th of an inch. And so really that's 43,000 decisions that went into making that. Everybody listening to this no longer likes Koons, but I promise you Koons will be occasionally capable of producing something that extraordinary. But then the next year, suddenly September 11, 2001 comes. And you have a complete change. The idea, the absurdity of placing just a joyful piece back into the world seemed to go away. And over, that's what, you've asked me a big question.
The big question is, who are you and how did you change?
Yeah. And then all of a sudden you had lesser known artists taking the stage. A woman artist named Alice Neal, who's now, we understand her as a deity, as a magic worker of the highest degree that could paint real pain as deep as anybody ever had, who was known in her lifetime but was never honored that way. Suddenly she was being shown. David Wojnarowicz, who died of AIDS, had his first big shows and made his first confessions in his work of being diagnosed with HIV. So we're seeing all of that. And all of a sudden, and that was the beginning of the journey of that century. But you could already see all these strands in play, not to mention the war machine.
When did you realize your own biases in this when we talk about how women and people of color sort of coming into the art scene, were there moments where you thought, yeah, I'm kind of culpable there too, I should have been covering this or that long before this?
I still think that.
Yeah.
Listen,
my ratio of male to female guests is god awful. My ratio of people of color to white people is terrible, and I'm cognizant. I always try and I always fail, but
Yeah, it's pretty bad. The art world talked the talk, but didn't walk the walk. Mm-hmm. And I want to jump ahead then to a double pandemic. You had all of us withdrawing from life in mid-March 2020, to almost making art in the conditions of the cave again. That is, you were making art in the same room that Nana was living in back of you, and your kids and your husband or mates are there, and the dogs are there, and the kitchen is there, and you're making art out of whatever was at hand, which is the earliest way our species made anything. The creativity is bred into our DNA. Darwin never said it's survival of the fittest. He said it's survival of those most able to adapt. And what we were all done is we were thrown into this world of adapting in real time in front of each other. How could we touch antenna on the one hand and stay in touch, and on the other, keep creating and evolving? To create is to evolve, which is also what art is like. To stop creating, I think, is to stop evolving, not towards progress, but simply as being human. Then, a number of months later, came the second bigger pandemic. Didn't kill in the millions, but that was George Floyd. And all of the people that were indoors rushed outdoors. And everyone who had been alone was suddenly one group mind with one, as clear a message as I remember from when I was young, where I knew the war was bad, and I knew civil rights had to be passed, and I knew women's liberation was real, gay liberation was real. I knew this black and white when I was young. Then we lost that in ambiguity and relative truths and blah, blah, blah. Suddenly it became crystal clear, and that has had an enormous effect in the art world already. More women, more artists of color, more underrepresented artists, more artists of every kind have taken the stage in a faster amount of time than I've ever seen in my entire life, and it's thrilling. Is there mediocre work being shown from all this? Yes, there is. Of course there is. But if a famous mediocre artist like Sean Scully, who paints kind of foggy squares and stripes, can sell paintings for millions of dollars and show in museums and be in mega galleries and biennials. If a mediocre white artists have had careers for the last 150 years.
Yeah.
So there's nothing odd about a mediocre. I'm Estonian. I'm an illegal Estonian immigrant. I'm an Estonian anchor baby from an illegal, my father. But there might even be some interesting Estonian work out there. I don't know, but I do know that the mediocre work washes out over time. And it's just anything that people need to get the shorts in a wad about. That this is going to take time. And like you say, your work and mine, we're part of the problem too. Also, as a white man, I didn't just have a second, third, and fourth chance. I probably had 10 chances to fail. People were never allowed that simple luxury that I've had my whole life that's been invisible to me, and yet I've known it at some deeper level. I've never gotten on a subway really and looked around and thought, is somebody going to rape me? When I turned the key in my front door, my entire life, I've never looked to the left or right to see if somebody's going to sneak in behind me. There's certain things that are just invisible to me that are my privilege. Anyway, a long way of saying that the market and money, this thing that we've all complained about endlessly, but especially in the last 3 or 4 years, led the way. Oddly enough, 50% of all of our collectors are Republicans and probably hardcore Trump supporters or Brexit supporters. And all of that market and all of that money and all of those auctions and all of the museums and all of the biennials started showing women and artists of color and underrepresented artists. That enormous financial machine was in front, in a way, of our beloved galleries. And that forced people like you and me to change. That's what the case was suddenly. You couldn't just complain that the biennial was all women, like the Venice Biennale this summer was about 85% women. And I always wrote this, if you ever tried that experiment, you wouldn't ruin art any more than it's ever been ruined. Yeah. So, and your podcast is not going to get much worse if you cover mainly Estonians or Peruvians. The problem is there's a lot of that language and those references that I'm not very clear on. And what that will do, if I don't make it my business to learn about that cuisine, as it were, that beat, those rhythms, those syncopations, if I do not learn that, I will be frozen in time, which is what happened to Greenberg after abstract expressionism. His taste, his eye grew dead. He could not see change. And that happens to critics. And I don't want it to happen to me. When it happens, I'll be at first unaware, like a creeping, sickness. You don't quite know it and you sense it. And they say the second most 100 tense days of cancer are not the first. First is the first 100 after, which you know and I know from my life. I also know that the second most stressful days are the 100 before, when you kind of know it. Something's a little off, and you're going, nah, that bump down there, that's nothing. That's just a mole, for fuck's sake. Anyway, a long answer because you get me turned on and I keep going.
It's the hair. I know it.
He looks like an Albrecht Dürer. I'm telling you.
This is
guy.
all pandemic.
No, it's
really
unbelievable. He's beautiful, the guy you're listening to. Don't listen to me. But
yeah, that question, I guess, of how you keep from becoming a tourist, how you stay aware, how you stay fresh, when you're doing this for decades. Which you do. And it's one of the questions, I guess, over the course of the book, to jump to the end of it, I suppose, by the last segment, they're more personal.
Yeah.
They're essayistic, and now some of them are deliberately as such, especially the Jasper Johns one you finish with, and the one previously about the lockdown era. But in general, there's more Jerry as a person.
There's only so much of yourself you can keep out of the work.
Yeah.
You can dance to keep yourself out of the work. I actually believed in the beginning I should keep myself out. But again, I think that's something that social media helped me do, to understand that I'm just as much content, deep content. Proust said every reader is reading themselves when they're reading a book or something like that. And I finally, around the year, 2016, once Trump was elected, because I was absolutely certain that the Democrats were going to win a 50-state victory. Yeah. That's how deluded I was.
I'm same page. There's only a friend of mine in the Midwest who's like, you have no idea what it's like out here.
Yes, and when I traveled to lecture right before that summer in Michigan and Ohio, Indiana, and Wisconsin and Illinois, where I'm from, and I kept seeing Trump signs, but I thought, nah. Those guys are being silly. That's just on the road. Yeah. So it was around then that I thought I have to drop all pretenses, not be didactic, not be an ideologue, but just share as much as my inner life as I can without getting in the way of the art, because that's not that interesting to me. Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah, and it's a sort of thing we all went through, the disjunction of everything we thought was a reality. In my case, there was a double issue with the fact that I was a lobbyist and didn't want to say anything too overt in case anybody ever listened down in Washington. Nobody ever listens to my show down there, but there was still okay, I'll be a little careful, but I think everybody's going to get exactly where I'm coming from, over those bunch of years.
That's interesting that you mentioned that, Gil, because right now in criticism, I think that critics are holding back.
Yeah.
I think that every review is positive, and I think being critical is a way of showing art respect. And I think the late Peter Schjeldahl, we can talk about him, who I used to talk to him on the phone almost every day for 35 years. My wife, Roberta Smith, who I think is the best, a close-in art critic of the art object of our time. And other critics, though a few still will write what they do like and what they don't, but almost every other review is either on the one hand positive, or if they don't like something, the second to the last sentence might say, and this is what finds this work problematized. And you go, wait, is that bad or is that a good thing? And the other problem with criticism is that only 1% of 1% of 1%, and I write a lot about this in the book, of the artists who make art are successful or make any money at all. And yet, about 99% of the coverage is on that 0.1%. And all of that is either about best art fair booths, best hot artists in the biennial, best highest prices, up and coming, young. I love all that too. I love to get jealous and envious, and I want all artists to make money, the good, the bad, and the very bad, as I've said many times. But I think it's insane. It's safe. It's a safe space for critics to either only attack Jeff Koons and Damien Hirst when both of them emerged, frankly, about 30 years ago. I mean, that's a little punching nowhere. Yeah. And every other show they love, and they only will cover... Look, it's just the system the way it is. I may not like it, but I also understand this is the system that has allowed more artists of color and women to show than in the history of the world. So I can't come from a position of poo-pooing it like a Greenberg and going, well, it's no longer a good art world. Yeah. I can't do that. It's a great art world because it's made the best and biggest change I've ever seen, which is what the whole last part of the book deals with.
Now, how much of the relentless positivity is tied to access? If I start writing negative things about shows, certain galleries or, collectors or artists will be against me.
I think you've raised a great rhetorical question. I would say to all critics, you're wrong. Yeah. You could write anything you want, and the art world is big enough that if you get cut off from that social scene or this one, there's 13 other ones. It's true, when I write a negative review, I'm not going to be invited to those dinners. That artist isn't going to talk to me, but the truth is, and my wife said this, we are not writing for the artist. We're writing for the reader. Yeah. It's very simple. That's our audience. We want to be a kind of go-between and say, this is why you should see this. This is what to maybe be thinking about while you're seeing it and to keep in mind. But without criticism, you can't write that every game the New York Giants play or the New York Nets play is great. Because it's not true. It's a lie. It's like
this
saying
is the Akeem Olajuwon thing, where he only sent videos of his winning games back to Nigeria to his family, so they thought he never lost a game because all they ever saw was all his wins.
And that's the way it is now. And again, I think that means that leaves us who do write this way at an advantage and gives us the time to do what you ask. Could we do? Can we adapt our taste to the time of the new languages and idioms and being spoken in art, in music, in popular culture or high culture? But we can't just say every TV show's good because it made us feel good. I mean, this is just silly. But that's okay. That, too, is a passing fad. And I've probably got some essays in here where I let this person off a little easier than that. But
who did you miss the boat on? You mentioned Cindy Sherman and Louise Bourgeois in the book as people it took you a while to get. Who do you really feel like, wow,
the first time I saw a young artist in 1990, let's start there, at the Andrea Rosen Gallery on Prince Street in Soho was an artist named Felix Gonzalez Torres, who put a bunch of stacks of paper in the gallery. And I looked at that and I thought, I don't know what that is. It looks like Donald Judd's to me, but everybody's taking the paper. Not long thereafter, I saw the photographs of Wolfgang Tillmans, who seemed to make sort of snapshots of like gay bars and nightlife and raves. And I thought, that's not art. So I have missed the ball. But what I try to do is, if I see sort of 1% of 1% of something in any work of art, how could you deny every aspect of Cindy Sherman? I couldn't deny all of it. I loved the film stills, but then I felt it doesn't matter what I felt it got. I just got kind of lost, but I kept looking at it. You keep looking, and you see if there's anything for you there, and if you can dig it up and what it is to you. But I have missed the boat. on artists. I've called artists good that turned out to be nothing. You've never heard of them. I won't name their names.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
But no, I do miss stuff. I can miss a show. Like this was a much better show or a much worse show than I thought. Sometimes artists that I really like, they can do no wrong. I'm the least reliable critic on earth, I think, of Matthew Barney. Yeah. I just have I have an art crush on his work. And even when it's turgid and awful and long and boring and so formalized you almost want to shoot yourself, I'm like, wow, look how beautiful it is. Yeah. But still. Yeah. So do you have artists or writers or things like that you just, everything they do, Bob Dylan is that way to me, except for the Christmas album. It's all good.
I'll put on Murder Most Foul and just kind of groove even in my later days like this. But being friends with artists?
Not much.
Okay. I mean, you mentioned social scenarios, but I'm not sure if they ever encountered
I've been attacked by artists at parties. I've been attacked by gallerists at parties. And it's scary when you're younger and you do see a whole part of your social life just collapse. But then again, you're just doing your work. If you're just doing your work for credibility rather than to be loved or to be successful, if you're really doing your work that because it is your work, because it's asking you to write it and to work on it, and it's kind of making you do it, then being attacked by others doesn't mean that much. You really start to grow elephant skin and go, yes, I can see how I was wrong on Felix Gonzalez Torres, but it's okay if I'm not invited to those parties. I'm not in high school anymore. And the truth is, weekly and daily critics like me, we're not really part of society. Roberta and I see 25 or 30 shows a week. And that's the deep content of this book. People that are seeing everything in New York were not paid to go to Brooklyn, let alone Documenta and Venice and all that. I wish I could go and be invited to those symposia with those curators that curate their shows and then they review each other's shows in our forum and they're on each other's panels and then they hire each other in the Kunsthal. And all of that is great by me. I just don't have that time. We go to 25 or 30 shows a week. We go out for a slice of pizza on a paper plate, conduct our notes. Everybody else is starting to go to their after parties or get depressed or something. And we go home and we begin working. And it has to be done in 4 days.
So tell me, two-critic family, how do you divvy things up? And you've placed her way above yourself in terms of being an art critic. So I'm not going to say what's it like being the second best art critic in your house, but what's it like being the second best and figuring out who covers which.
I'll tell the art world a secret. If Roberta wants to do a show, Gil, I always will say she should do it, because if I'm a museum, young artist, established artist, gallery, whoever, I know they want a review from Roberta Smith. I don't think it's that they want a review from the New York Times, because people listening to this, they don't know every writer, every music critic or every book or every art critic that writes at the Times. And again, that goes back to credibility. They're reading certain voices they trust. You may trust this voice or that. I happen to trust Roberta. So therefore, I will always, under any circumstances, bow. If she says, well, I saw that show too today while you were in this gallery, I saw it the hour before or hour after, and I always say, you do it. Because a magazine critic writes differently. I get more space. I'm writing on clay-covered paper. 99% of my readership comes online anyway, and I know I can return to things. Hers is absolutely pegged to the here, the right now. So, and what's it like living with her? It's astounding to listen to Roberta's observations about art. She's pretty hardcore, but we are very different critics.
Yeah, can you characterize that? And I'd love to record with her someday too, but that's down the line.
So. She'd give you the real deal. I think, again, I'm much more interested in context. Like, what gallery is this in? who is this artist, not their biography so much, but just where this fits, where it fits in the now. I become a character in the work sometimes, interacting with it or the artist or the gallery or other events. I think I'm much more interested in narrative and a kind of poetic, if you will, where she's much, much more exclusively about the object, like its form, its structure, its surface, its colors, how it's made. I love all that. I cover that in every review, but it's not enough for me. I'm from Chicago, and we grew up with a different modernism. I grew up going to a place called Maxwell Street, which was a secondhand, like a big, gigantic sort of swap meet that used to happen. I grew up going to Chicago blues bars and jazz bars in the 70s, because I'm old, where I saw any name you can think of, from Miles Davis and Thelonious Monk to Muddy Waters and B.B. King, Ornette Coleman, anyone you can think of, I have seen play in a room the size of your bedroom. And I've sat at tables with them because these were in tiny basement rooms with, a bunch of white kids often, and then black people there, white people over there, but a total of 25 people in the room. And between sets, you're buying each other's beer and smoking cigarettes together. And our art, don't forget, I worked for Phyllis Kind, who is the gallerist in Chicago, late gallerist, who is the first to show Martin Ramirez, one of the great visionary artists, Henry Darger, who worked in Chicago. I met Joseph Yoakum, another outsider artist. I helped Martin Ramirez get a U.S. postage stamp. So all of this sort of second city insecurity also had a lot to do with an outsider mentality and an appreciation of the outsider. Visionary, eccentric stuff. And that, again, would be a big difference between me and Roberta, although she loves what is still, unfortunately, called outsider art.
I would say, in a sense, as you're describing it, more personality-driven in terms of seeing the artist?
I never want to know about personality.
Or persona, maybe. I don't know the
I don't
identity
know
of the
either,
artist
because I always say to people, I don't want to hear the backstory. You can tell me one sentence of their backstory, but I don't really want it to rest on that they
This is about the day that I was...
I can't do that unless it really is embedded in the work.
I will say, in relation to the art object question, one of my favorite pieces of yours can't be reproduced in here, unfortunately. It's one of those diagram breakdowns you did of the boxer at rest.
Oh, yeah. A Roman remake of a Greek boxer who was a slave. They take his foreskin and sew it up. There's a name for that, so he cannot get an erection. So there's no sexuality to this man that's as huge as Steven Seagal or something. And, it was an amazing piece. I had read a short story about him, the Pugilist at Rest by Tom Jones years before, and then saw your piece. Actually, one of my greatest drawings is the face of the boxer. Yeah,
it
his
took me
nose
weeks and
has
weeks.
been broken.
Yeah, every little thing, and it, as you saw from looking at my art before, it's still, I'll say, illustrative / cartoonish, but
so is Rembrandt.
I mean that in a positive way. I mean that's where I'm coming from visually. Yeah. But it was just those attempts at capturing the brow, and everything that's seen in that face. I was just like, I'm going to try to do the boxer, and great. I'll send you a picture of it at some point. But yeah, that piece, I'm like, you can't reproduce that in this book because it was the statue itself with these little insets all around it. But that was so focused on the object in front of you because there is no sculptor.
That's true. That's so smart what you're saying. In a way, some art can get so profound that the world slips away.
Yeah. Right? Well, the Dying Gaul, which you do include in here also.
The Dying Gaul, Botticelli, Caravaggio. Again, and that was happening a lot during lockdown for me when I was time traveling. to these places within myself, structures. It's like when you read, say, Homer. And
this is my big question for your literary background.
Yeah. Well, I have no literary background.
Doesn't matter. What were you reading and when?
The truth is...
Your big artistic project was centered on Dante. And you would do that without having read Dante at some point. So
when I was very young, my artistic project was to illustrate all 100 cantos of Dante's Divine Comedy. And it was the only book I had ever read. I think it's because I grew up in chaos with a lot of violence. I was never physically or sexually abused, but there was drug addiction in my house. It was complete chaos. Yeah. And I would read and reread Dante over and over. It's the only book I ever read. Then I stopped reading after I stopped being an artist and stopped working with Dante. But then at some point around the turn of the century, I thought, if I'm going to call myself an art critic, I better read, because I had never read anything. Mm-hmm. And I'm not a good reader. So I thought, I'm going to start at the start. I'm going to do the Western canon. Yeah. And I would pick one big book each year and read several different translations of it simultaneously and take a year to read it. I started with the Iliad.
It's the best place to start.
It was pretty
I'm an Iliad
good.
guy and not an Odyssey guy, and this is a thing.
They say that's the boy story, and the Odyssey is the girl story. But it's too essentialist to even imagine.
There's a lot more new, and I get people who are Odyssey people. I get what they're getting. Yeah. And I'm like, it's just there's, and I'll share my Iliad theory with you after this. Because
say it here.
Oh, I've gone into it in the show before.
If I'm boring you're allowed to bore the audience too.
My belief, and I've mentioned it on the show, is that Achilles is the only figure who actually knows his fate. Because when they send an envoy to him, he explains that he knows if he stays and fights, he'll die there and become the center of the poem that you're reading in that moment, where he could leave and go back and lead a totally forgotten life back at home and die, essentially nameless, forgotten by history. And the other characters literally can't understand him when he's talking. Like, they're repeating various things that he says when they're reporting back. The stuff about his fate never comes up. A guy who was in the room with him, Patroclus, asks him later on, do you know something about your fate you're not telling us? And my brother contends this is all just textual redactions later on. But I, in my poetic sense, like to believe not only that Achilles knows what's coming, no one else can ever understand him. That he's much more isolated for being this big
half
hero.
God too.
Yeah, and that's why he's able to, but he can never make himself understood to other human beings.
I love that. Go right on it. Make drawings. Make a 100-part series on that. Wait, I wanted to say something about that.
Reading a big book.
The Greeks, when they're writing this, the Homer poet.
Yeah, we'll just say Homer.
They looked around themselves in around 500 or 400 or 800 BC. And I think they were in shock about how advanced they were. To their south, one day's sail. So they were seeing sails every day from Egypt, from the Middle East, from a place called, what we call Italy today, from, Turkey, which wasn't called that then. They looked around and saw like Mesopotamia, these cultures that had been going 5,000 years, but had never changed. Because they did so by controlling water. These floods that would come each year and they go down. So the gods there, the Pharaoh or whoever's in charge, had to have dictatorial, godlike power. That just wasn't necessary in Greece. And I think they just woke up around 800 BC and they looked around and went, hey, our pottery is better. We have better stories. We have more gods and they're kind of better. There's more sex in our stories. And then you read I read the Iliad, the Odyssey, and then the Aeneid, and you realize all the people you thought were good guys in the Iliad and the Odyssey, they were fuckers.
It depends
they
on
were
who's
the
looking at
bad
them.
guys
Yeah.
when it was written from the Trojan side. So anyway, very long way of saying, and I basically worked my way through the canon and got stuck, unfortunately, on Proust, and keep reading and rereading it. And
I used to believe, you're not supposed to read them until you're 40 or something, but I was 30, it was 2005, so I was 34 years old, making my third stab at him. And lucky for me, my father had a quintuple bypass. So all the time spent sitting in waiting rooms in the hospital and all that, I was just
something to do,
plowing through Proust. And finished it. And I was like, oh, wow, that's all I needed to do.
Well, he's like your Achilles, too, a half god who knows his fate, because you don't know this until the last book, that the story you're reading is the story of the writing of this book. Somebody once said, can you sum up Proust? And somebody said, Marcel writes a book. And then another guy gets him and goes, I think that's true, but I'd like to make a change. And the guy says, what? And he goes, Marcel finally writes a book. So that's the 7 volumes. And I try to get these idiot structures that I hear and feel. It's like when you listen to like Led Zeppelin, this sort of homemade, try anything, do it yourself, rough, semi-uncut, gets lazy or a mess, where you hear the mistakes and you hear the off notes. That aesthetic interests me, and I try to get that in my work. Or, just what I mean by these deeper structures.
Yeah. And it's interesting. I mean, it's something you bring up, especially with photography early on, but throughout with the critique of modernism. The thing that's amazing about Proust, which is that the book ultimately is about its own generation, is what becomes the going up its own asshole of art, where everything is just, referencing itself in a way that becomes exclusionary to everyone.
And what happens is, this is that Proust, but in reverse. I think that art came out of its own ass in the 21st century.
Yeah.
And realized that if it did not accept more of the world would accept less of it.
Right.
And by now, art is playing an enormous role in culture. Now, you may not like the 2 portraits of Obama and Michelle Obama by Kehinde Wiley and Amy Sherrill. The Wiley is not that good of a painting. It's a little bit clever. The Sherrill, on the other hand, captures something of this sort of Michelle Obama and the Obamas. Whether they're good paintings or not, imagine the tens of thousands of kids that are in these museums seeing those people by 2 more black artists. And this repeats over and over and over again, and you can't help but know that real life is embedded in this art, and where the art is helping you see the world and the world is helping you see the art.
First show you saw after lockdowns? First time you came back into the city?
God, I'm trying to remember. Well, this was a horrible story. I went to see a show at the new museum and forgot to have a mask on when I first came in the door. It was early.
And I live in the woods. I'm the same thing. It took so long before I reflexively grabbed one before going somewhere.
I walked in and they kicked me out. So my first experience back, not so good. Not so good. I don't remember, but knowing me, it was probably some Saturday when I knew that the galleries were open, and I probably saw 30 shows, and I was in love. I was touching antenna again with, for me, my favorite people in the art world, and I write about this too, are the gallerists. Everybody listening to this, I know they're missing the same chromosome, that they kind of crowd you if you're a critic, and act snooty to you maybe if you're not. I would remind people that most dealers have no money. Only a very few have a lot of money. That they're mom and pop operations, as it were, and they're living month to month, more than you think.
Was there a wave of closures from the lockdown?
I predicted there would be an enormous wave of closures. Not enormous, but big, and I was completely wrong.
Good.
Because there's so much money in the art world that and art fairs and online platforms, whatever the hell you may not like, kept this most important sponge of the art world where everything is filtered through. You know, the good, the bad, the ugly gets filtered through galleries or where new art comes from. And if you can't show in a gallery, you'll show in an artist-run space. And if you can't show in an artist-run space, you'll show somewhere, okay? And I like dealers for putting their money where their taste is.
Let me ask, I mean, during lockdown, and it's something I asked Peter Schjeldahl when we recorded last year, the notion of looking at art online.
Yeah.
And he said those are just images. That's not
not
seeing
art.
the art.
It's hard to, I guess it's like porn, where I guess.
So I have very strong positions on porn, so you better be, I'm just kidding.
Who does? He did know. Where I guess it's a cool image, but you forget how physical and how sexy or unsexy objects are and how they take up space. So, look, I'm fine with seeing art online. It's no biggie. I understand that most of the art I've seen is online. I've never seen the pyramids.
Sure.
I've never seen the Taj Mahal, and I love them. So it's okay. I've never been to Machu Picchu. So seeing art online, it's no problem. I understand it's a digital file, and I'm not seeing anything, and not one of these pictures actually exists anywhere except on a circuit for an instant, and then it's embedded in some social platform that we will not even be able to read, like a beta videotape, within 9 years. My guess is my Instagram with its 500,000 followers and like that, if I don't, whatever it's called, archive it, it'd be gone. There'd be no way to find it. It'd be like that library I have of CDs and cassette
audio
tapes.
cassettes. That's the big one. Yeah.
I just threw it all out.
Yeah. Tell me about Peter. You mentioned talking with him for every day for 35 years. In your intro, you mentioned how him coming to review your work was, validation back in the 70s. And we lost him this weekend.
Yeah.
And
Peter did something that all critics really want to do. I don't know if people know this. Peter died on deadline. I mean, that's an amazing feat. Peter knew he was sick. He had, as everybody knows, stage 4 lung cancer. We went through all of that together. The doctors told him to go home, put his, affairs in order. There's no chemo for you. We chalked and my wife, Roberta, has cancer too, and is taking something called immunotherapy drugs, which all of you listening to this, you're all going to be on it, and they're pretty great. They have no side effects. They're pretty great.
That's what they told me about my leukemia. Don't worry, by the time you need it, the immunotherapeutics are going to be awesome.
No, it's insane how many arrows there are in their quiver. And chemo is not what your parents' chemo was anymore. So all you big scaredy cats, only be a little less scared. So Peter, they said, well, we'll try this immunotherapy, and it's worked for him. And so when he died, I know this, he had gone to the Met to see a show, and then went back up to Bovina and laid down to take a nap and didn't wake up again. So he didn't even know. So that's a blessing. We used to talk every morning because critics don't have anything to talk about but what they see.
Yeah.
And it's pretty damn boring. Because you ask other people, what did you see? And they'll say, well, I went and saw one show, then I met some friends for a coffee or had dinner or something like that. And writers' shop talk is pretty boring too. How do you sit? What did you write? How did you rewrite this sentence? And Peter often he would talk his reviews a lot. I could tell when he was writing anything. He'd say, well, I saw the Tillman show, and before I know it, I'm hearing every single one of the ideas. And what I learned to do is two things. One is his opinions were so strong that I found that they would influence me. So if I was going to write about something, I would always go, we can't talk about this show.
Haven't written it yet. Don't want to hear your take.
Yeah, because you'll fucking freak me out.
Yeah.
You know, I'll freak out. Like, Jesus, I didn't like it as much or liked it, whatever.
Maybe I just, you and self-doubt I find very hard to believe.
So I was very careful with that. But he would then often read me his whole reviews. Mm-hmm. He talked a lot about the Mets, wouldn't let me talk about the Yankees. I used to have to tell Peter, occasionally you have to pretend you're aware that there's other people around you, that you have to pretend that you notice them and go, oh, how are you? Because he was a kind of genius, maybe almost on the spectrum. Like my wife, they're so focused on art that sometimes they don't see their EQ, their emotional IQ, can be extremely low. He had the fastest quick take of any critic I've ever met. There would be artists that I and Roberta would know for like 6 months, 8, 9 months coming up in the art world that I had my eye on and that I had a really good idea of what their work was about. And then Peter said, oh, I'm going to go see the work this weekend. And I'd say, great, go see it. I can't wait to talk. And on Monday we would talk and he would nail it. Just fucking nail it. And I'd tell him right on the phone, I can't believe it. You would cut right to it. Yeah. His first column for The New Yorker was on, he named a movement. Was back then, that would have been 1998, because I got his former job at the Village Voice. When he left the Voice for The New Yorker, I was writing for Arts Magazine and Time Out, had never written for such high-profile stuff. And he told me he was leaving the Village Voice, and neither of us suggested me for the job. It never occurred to me. It never occurred to him. I'll be honest with you. We were both trying to think of other people that should get it. And one day, Vince Aletti, who was his editor at The Voice, do you want to hear all this?
Yeah.
Called me and said, Jerry, I'd like you to be the critic for the Village Voice. And I went, no way. There's no way I could do that. I'm not good enough. But give me a week to think about it. And really, it was the thought of the envy and the pain that would eat me alive. If I didn't take this job for the next 10 years, I'd read The Voice every week and go,
could have been me.
Could have been me. And when New York Magazine called me and offered me a job, same problem. I said, no way. And I actually told them, I am too, much like a glockenspiel for you guys. You would not want me. I'm off the charts. I really go wild in my work. I'll say everything and anything. I put it out there. And they said, no, we want you. And then a friend of mine said, don't you know who Adam Moss is? That was the editor then. I said, no, I don't know anything. And they said, the whole magazine is being rebuilt and it's going to be great. And I called them up and begged them for the job. So Peter never thought of me for the job, nor did I. His first article was on a Venice Biennale, and he named what we call festivalism. Which was a great description of the kind of gigantic installations that have taken over all biennials and how we look at them and are pleasured by them momentarily and then move on for the next ecstasy. It was great being friends with Peter. Of all the things I tried to help him with in his work, and this applies to Roberta too, I don't think I ever got one thing of mine into his work. Ever. Or hers. Yeah. It's astounding where you're trying to be their muse a little bit.
Helpmeet.
I'm trying to be helpmeet. And, but I think I'm a bit like that too. The people I know are trying to help me do this, but you can only do it your own way. Or you'll steal the idea anyway without knowing it.
I was very thankful. Sebastian Smee used a line of mine in Lucian Freud write-up a couple of weeks ago.
Bingo.
Yeah, we did a session, and I mentioned this line by Frank O'Hara, and he He lifted it. Not lifted it. He used it. Because even at the time, he said, oh, that's really good. I got to figure out where to use that. And it showed up in this Freud thing. Like, I know where that came from.
God, Gil, you do really good people. I'm sort of horrified that you're doing it. I mean, I love my work, but I know my work is different. But there you go.
You've got a career. You've got a 20-year collection. That's, between that and, a gigantic social media following, which I should ask, the performance of Jerry Saltz on social media versus Jerry himself. Who are you? And who's on screen? And what do you do when you're
Well, first of all, it turns out my second self is really an amazing person to me. Yeah. He's gregarious. He's very social digitally. He'll talk to anybody. And he loves everybody. It's just amazing. Yeah. And my real self, I've gone to maybe 5 sit-down dinners in the last 10 years. We don't go out. As I said, we're not really part of society. We go home and we work because we're lucky. Yeah. We're the last printed word weekly and daily art critics writing. Our kind will not exist soon. Now that Peter's gone, there's a few people left in the United States. But it was online and by accident that I learned in around 2009 or something, instead of on Facebook posting something like, I'm going to the dentist today, I happened to write, I saw the work of Marlene Dumas, and this is why I didn't like the show. And about 50 people came on and yelled at me. And within 1 second, I understood what had happened. I suddenly realized that this pyramidical structure of criticism that I had been trying to work against, and that also felt was holding me down, of the gatekeepers and power and authority and feeling this art world too rigid and ruled and official bound. Suddenly I realized instead of the one critic writing to the many, I could have the many speak to one another on a horizontal field, where if I were kind of the referee and made up rules of how we could do this, this could work. That was the first second. 1 second later, I made up the 2 rules. And the 2 rules I've stuck to. 1, you may attack me, but you may not attack anybody else on this thread. Because once you do that, I've noticed right away, everybody's yelling at everybody else, and I don't even know what the fuck is going on. And the other is if you're a cynic. I don't like cynics. Cynics think they know things. They have certainty. They're knowers. D.H. Lawrence had a term called knowers. He hated people he called knowers, certitude. And I realized they made me very sleepy when they would say, well, you know why she got the show? You know why he's got a gallery? You know why she's got this? And I always think, you don't know anything. You don't really know people's traumas. All of us have come through and gotten here pretty much through the same doors. That's the price of the House of Creativity, which again is the deep content of this book. And so on my social media, I realized I could practice a new thing called art criticism this way. And I didn't have to answer to anybody, and the deadlines could be daily. And because that's how art is my life. It saved my life, and I thought maybe it can also save other people's lives just by having this life lived in art. And around 2012, I used to be on these top 100 power art world lists. Yeah. And I secretly loved it. People would say, oh, Jerry, you're number 56. And I'd go, oh, really? I didn't notice. But I knew. I knew.
And you knew who was 55.
Yes. Jasper Johns was worse than me. That's how dumb. They only put their advertisers on. Of course. And people that are going to give them junkets and the big directors and like Hansel Oberst and all those guys. Good for them. I'm completely happy. I'm envious of them. But I couldn't do what they do. I can't walk that walk. I don't know how to talk the talk, and I can't stay up that late every night. Art Review magazine, when in that year, wrote something like Jerry Saltz is this, that, and the other, but If he keeps trying to practice art criticism online, he'll never be on a list like this again. And I never was again on any of them. And I was really trashed for a long time for daring to do this. And maybe I do it badly. I don't know. My second self is an asshole. And I try to keep that in. I don't know where it comes from. I don't think I'm too assholey my first self in person. Yeah. I really don't. I'm sure I am sometimes.
You're selling yourself short. You're quite an asshole.
No, I'm quite an asshole. But this second self, sometimes it gets very short and will snap at people or misread things. Again, I don't mind the criticism of me. That part, no problem. I'm here for that. Bring it. And I've acted out sometimes. Early on, I was posting pictures of medieval torture that had a lot to do with like cutting off body parts, just all sorts of things, writing wise guy captions, and people were very upset by that. And I first tried to fight it, and I thought, no, I should just listen. If the group mind is telling me this, I have to listen. And the truth was, I should have listened sooner. Because I unfortunately let it define me. I let them define me. Like, they thought they knew my intentions. Those weren't my intentions. But if the group mind says they are, I accept that. Yeah. No, but I accept that. It's like, whatever I did wrong in putting out my intentions, I have to accept that that's how they took them. Yeah. And so I gave in, and I'm really happy. But on my tombstone, the first words of my obituary, there's a chant they could go, online art critic, It's possible. Does that erase all my work? Not to me, it doesn't.
And you get to lead off with Pulitzer Prize winning.
So well, that's that.
You still get, all I get is some schlub from New Jersey.
He shouldn't have gotten it. It should have gone to Roberta. I deserve it. I love my work. I do love my work, and I love doing it. But I still think that the best living art critic is Roberta. Yeah. But I'm biased. Of course.
I should let you go. But last question, who are you reading? And I usually warn people so they don't draw a complete blank and feel like a moron. But in this case, I figured you deserve it. So.
Yeah. I reread Proust again this summer and really loved it. I'm reading right now. Let me just go to something. I'm just trying to tell you what I've been.
Oh, no, I've been doing the same thing.
I know what I read just recently that I love by Oscar Wilde, which I would call a must-read, called De Profundis. Mm-hmm. It's a kind of letter from prison where he's basically saying, who's the guy that he got caught having sex with, Birdie or...
Yeah, I forget his name.
I can't remember. Anyway... he completely writes this gorgeous confession, how he realizes how terrible this guy is for him. But the truth is, the minute he got out of prison, he went right back with him. And he was dead within a year. I read Samson Agonistes by Milton, which I think is great.
So you're still keeping that Western canon thing going.
I'm still going with that. I read Ada Calhoun's account of her father, also a poet.
Yeah.
Which is a great book on Frank O'Hare.
I was hoping to interview her, sometime when it first came out, but now
and
that he's gone.
And then a couple more I'll have to name. Yeah. And she gets Peter very well, except from a daughter's point of view. Yeah. When the negative part she's speaking is from a place I can't know. I only was his friend, but I recognize my great friend in it. And then I read The Bluest Eye, which I had never read, by Toni Morrison, which I think is among the best books of the 20th century, with Alexander Solzhenitsyn's Gulag Archipelago, if I'm pronouncing that right. Wallace Stevens, who I would tell no one to read, but he's my favorite poet after Walt Whitman. But do not read Wallace Stevens. He's incredibly difficult, and I read it all the time.
I will send you a clip of when I recorded with Harold Bloom.
Jesus God.
And I started him off with, what poems would you want read at your memorial? Because we were not fucking around. I knew I only had like 40, 45 minutes with him, so we just started with death. And he It takes him a minute or two to find his fastball,
Yeah.
but he starts reciting a poem by Stevens, and it'll just knock you the fuck out.
So listen.
Oh, I will send this to you. Jerry, thanks so much for coming on. I'm so thankful to see a collection like this. And just like in the story you have with Jasper Johns, I won't ask you about your reality TV experience. So that's that okay?
You won't? Or you
Won't.
Thank you. It was fun. I gained 11 pounds.
And that was Jerry Saltz. His new collection, Art is Life, is out now from Riverhead Books. It really is a blast, and it really does get across those vectors we were talking about of art and money and galleries and representation and politics over the course of the reviews and over the course of the 21st century. And like I said, those last few pieces are really strong personal essays about the art life. The final one is about his relationship to Jasper Johns, not with, but to, and what Johns' work has meant to him. And, well, it's a doozy. I remember reading it in the magazine, and seeing it here as the culmination of the book is really, well, it's very fitting. Now, Jerry, as we established, is really, really on social media. He is on Twitter and Instagram as Jerry Saltz, all one word, JerrySaltz. The Instagram posts and stories they're pretty amazing. So check those out and go read Jerry's work in New York Magazine and on Vulture. Now, you can support the Virtual Memories show by telling other people about it. Just tell them that there's this guy out there recording these really neat podcasts when he's supposed to be on vacation and should just be chilling the hell out, but cannot stop. You can also tell me what you like and don't like about the show, who you want to hear me record with, or what movie or TV show or book or music or art exhibition or piece of theater, or whatever you think I should turn listeners on to. You can do that by email, DM, postcard. I love postcards, letters, or by leaving me a message on my Google Voice number, which is 973-869-9659. That goes directly to voicemail, so you don't have to worry about getting stuck in an awkward conversation with me. And messages can be only up to 3 minutes long. So if you're going to go longer than that, call back, leave a second message. And let me know if it would be okay to use your message in an upcoming episode of the show. You might say something that would be really neat for our listeners to hear, but I'd never run that without the speaker's approval. And if you've got money or resources to spare, don't give it to me. I always appreciate it, but my job treats me just fine, sends me, well, now it sent me to Frankfurt, Germany. But anyway, neither here nor there. My job treats me fine. The expenses for the podcast are pretty minimal, although I ran up a little bill doing the show with Jerry, between the toll to George Washington, another $50 for parking, blah, 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 blah. I can afford it. What I'd love for you to do, if you can afford it, is help other people. Donate to individuals or institutions in need. You can find people through GoFundMe, Patreon, Kickstarter, Topato.go, Crowdfunder, and other crowdfunding platforms. And if you're looking for somewhere to start with institutions or foundations, I give to my local food bank, give to the Poor People's Campaign. I make targeted election contributions. There are other things you can do, like freedom funds, women's choice and abortion funds. There are all sorts of different ways we can help try to work toward a better world. So I hope you will. Our music for this episode is Fella by Hal Mayforth, used with permission from the artist. You should visit my archives to check out my episode with Hal from the summer of 2018 and learn more about his art and painting. And you can listen to his music at soundcloud.com/Mayforth. And that's MAY4TH. And that's it for this week's episode of the Virtual Memories Show. Thanks so much for listening. We'll be back next week with another great conversation. You can subscribe to the Virtual Memories Show and download past episodes at the iTunes Store. You can also find all our episodes and get on our email list at either of our websites, vmspod.com or chimeraobscura.com/VM. You can also follow the Virtual Memories Show on Twitter and Instagram at VMSPod, at virtualmemoriespodcast.tumblr.com, and on YouTube, Spotify, and TuneIn.com by searching for Virtual Memories Show. And if you like this podcast, please tell your pals, talk it up on social media, and go to iTunes, look up the Virtual Memories Show, and leave a rating and maybe a review for us. It all goes to helping us build a bigger audience. You've been listening to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gil Roth. Keep reading, keep making art, and keep the conversation going.